There are two things that all MSK therapists have in common the world over. They love free trials and exercise prescription. So if you're a chiro, physio, osteo, or some sort of os-chiesio hybrid, then head to rehabmypatient.com/physio matters now and get 3 months on us of the best exercise prescription software available.
Billy Troy, welcome to Chewing It Over. Tell me, why should we care about the specifics of golf assessment and treatment?
It's a great question. It's a very heavy-hitting question to start off with, Jack, but I definitely appreciate it. And I guess with physiotherapy, I myself am a big believer in trying to specialize. I know you may disagree with that and other people may disagree with that too. But for me, being the jack of all trades is pretty hard. And for me, I think with golf, that's a passion of mine. I've played golf as a young kid. I think it was really nice for me to try and get into that and try and specialize in that. In saying that, also, golf is a very interesting sport. It's very much rotational based. And with that, I believe you need some specialist skills with that as well, Jack.
It is quite unique in that, isn't it? The rotational element. I definitely want to talk to you a bit about that, because you get a bit of that with tennis and other racket sports, but not to the same degree. And so, is that something? Is that a key part of both the assessment and treatment, specificity? Really, that rotational element.
100%. And it's one of the key things I look at with golf physiotherapy specifically is how someone moves, particularly from the spine, the hips, the shoulders in that rotational sense. And because with golf, typically most people keep the feet planted, it really restricts your movement, obviously. So if someone moves quite poorly through those rotational centers, then sometimes they might get upset.
Gotcha. Now, when I remember many years ago speaking to tennis coaches about tennis elbow, and they said that the best treatment for tennis elbow is a good tennis lesson. And they were just meaning that essentially the act of being overly whippy with the forearm is usually that they're not transferring force sensibly through the body. And it made a lot of sense. And I sort of saw that clinically. Now, we know that a lot of tennis elbow isn't anything to do with tennis, but it was just meaning that when they see it within, they can coach it out of their players if it emerges in juniors, etc. I can imagine a similar sort of thing occurring then in golf, whereby poor golf technique, particularly on a high velocity thing like a drive, etc., would end up meaning that then it ends up being a real funny line where coaching starts and physio begins and stuff. Do you personally do a bit of both, and do you recognize, or are there crisper lines than I'm describing?
No, the lines are very blurred, and with that as well, I pride myself being a physiotherapist and also a strength coach, and that's where my skills lie. I do obviously look at technique as well, and I keep an eye on certain positions that potentially may cause injury down the track. But I myself work with a number of different golf coaches, both here locally, overseas, different states. And where my job finishes, I'll hand it over to them. But I think you're seeing a lot more in golf and also other different sports is there's a team element to that. So you might have a physiotherapist, you might have a nutritionist, psychologist, etc. And it's having that team approach to really help benefit that client. So I guess to answer your question there, mate, is yes, there are lines there. They are a bit blurred, but I try and stay within my lane as much as possible.
No, fair play. How did you get into it then? You mentioned about playing yourself as a junior and it being an interest of yours, but talk me through then that career journey and why you find it so interesting enough to specialize in.
Yeah, so as a young physio, like I mentioned before, I found being a generalist quite hard. So let's say, for example, a person might come in with lower back pain and then someone comes in with a scaphoidal injury. I found it quite hard to jump between those two boxes. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist in some ways as well. So I really like to do a good job with all my clients. And I started to see golfers just randomly at the clinic I was working at occasionally. I wasn't marketing to it at all. They were just coming in. And because I liked golf so much, I found the consults just went so fast and I really enjoyed the chats. It felt like I was chatting to a mate, for example. And as that happened more and more often, I started to work really hard for these golfers to try and make them better. And I started to learn a lot more. My skills improved. And then I thought to myself, there might be a bit of a market to this. And I guess that's where my sort of that business mind came into it, more so than the clinical mind. And over time, mate, it's just started to grow organically and with a lot of hard work too.
Great. No, I'm pleased to hear your successes in that. And I think that I've heard this a few times, but, there's a lot of perfectionism in our trade. And I think I'm realizing that one of the reasons I've made peace with it is I'm absolutely happy to be bang average at everything. And that's what I've made peace with. So talk me through what would then be typical for an assessment of a golfer then. So we don't necessarily need to get into the nitty gritty of clinical case studies. We can later in the chat, of course, but I'm more interested in, or if you can unpack for me what it is you're looking for on assessment. We can talk about what in the general. I imagine it's not vastly different in the sort of subjective history taken, etc. But what are your key lookouts, and then what are you doing that might be slightly different than with a golfer?
Yeah, certainly. And I'll start it off with a brief summary, and I can get into the nitty gritty a little bit following that. So each of my clients that I get goes through a couple of different steps. So first of all, there's a golfing institute that designed a screening. So that's called the Titleist Performance Institute. So that has 16 different tests, which is a good place to start. And all of my players start there, but it is general. It's starting to get outdated as well. So I'll go through that. I'll secondly go through a swing assessment. So either if I'm doing the assessment via Zoom or via FaceTime, they'll send me swings prior to that. So I'll look at the swing from an injury standpoint. And then also additionally to this, I'll do some physio specific tests if needed. So for example, a client came in today and he had tennis elbow. So I gave him a few different tests to really knuckle down on that area. And what I'm typically looking for, there's a few big ones. So hip internal rotation is a large one I look at, and that's one of the first things I'm really keen to check. Thoracic rotation is another one. And also for me, I like good global strength as well. So can they squat, hinge, deadlift in decent positions?
Okay. No, that's great. And what about certain subjective lookouts then? Are there a typical, I suppose even before that, with regards to subjective stuff, is like, if you can give me a sort of profile of presentation, that'd be useful. Like you're seeing mostly backs, majority backs, ankles, knees, where's it distributed?
Yeah, so if it's from an injury standpoint, it's definitely a lower back, and roughly 50% of golfers will have lower back pain at one point. So that's definitely number one. I'd say a close second would be either tennis elbow or golfer's elbow. And I'd say thirdly would be a hip issue as well. And even with elite golfers, around 25% of them will have severe hip pain at one point. But I will add to that as well, I'm starting to see a lot more golfers just for strength and conditioning and performance. So although some people don't think golf is a sport, or it isn't a sport that requires a lot of physical demands, a lot of research is coming out that if you can hit the ball further, then you will play better. So a lot of my clients are catching on to that, and they might type in golf physio in the local area, then my name might pop up, for example. So I'm getting a lot more clients coming in for strength and conditioning now, which is great.
Yeah, so working out how they can organize their body to be more efficient beyond sort of technique race coaching is like, where can I be stronger, where can I be more mobile, etc. So I can really understand that intersection between physio and conditioning. So what we're laughing at there is because off air, I've one of my favorite go-to jokes. Billy asked me whether I play golf, and I said no, I prefer sport. Which is what and Aussies never like me for that as well, because I make the same joke about cricket, right? So I'm fairly consistent, right? So whenever I'm asked, like, especially because I'm fairly tall and lanky, they'll say, I imagine you played cricket. I said, no, I prefer sport. It's like one of my favorite jokes. But as much as it is a favorite joke of mine, I will admit that it is, of course, a sport. And I think that sometimes, though, because it is accessible through the generations and it has different iterations of it, means that then it can sometimes be undermined. The physical demands of golf can be understated and therefore taken for granted a little bit. And sometimes that can mean in juniors it's not well considered. Unfortunately, they're thinking develop stress fracture from being on a driving range too much. And similarly in older people, it's assumed that, well, to help them with their knees and hips in golf would be just making sure they can walk around the 18 holes rather than thinking about what the actual demands are of the striking. So let's then go into subjective lookouts then. What are the sort of things that you're concerned about? Let's stick with spinal for now then. What are the classic things that they're describing? Is it sharp symptoms on contact on particular parts of a swing classically, or is it that just an ache that then builds up through the round? Give me some of those clues.
Yeah, and it's very dependent, I guess, like every injury is on age, etc. But maybe I'll try and break it down to a couple of categories. So
Cool.
if it's a younger player, then certainly it's typically the sharp, stabby pain, and that's where I'm thinking about bad disc injuries, potential stress fractures, etc.
Right.
Typically in the older clientele, it's the reports of stiffness or soreness, or they're struggling moving throughout the swing. So that's slightly different. And also the other alarm bells would be pain down the legs or issues of that nature. And you mentioned swing positions as well, because that's a great question. A lot of clients that I see, they do feel pain at ball impact. And that's where the spine is typically most vulnerable, because you're in this downswing. Some people will pause at the impact position as well, unknowingly. And if you don't move very well, that impact position can be quite cramping for the body, because people's hips tend to get quite close to the ball. So they're typically the main complaints or main queries in a subjective I get.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting about the I wouldn't know or think about if they pause unknowingly at impact. There's an inefficiency to that. You could imagine needing to really go through the ball and follow that through, but that jerk, that jolt would naturally make a difference. One of the things I've been thinking about when I've been managing golfers, admittedly as a generalist, and this I'm as nervous as I can be in this conversation to mention this. This is where you can tut and shake your head at me. But I suppose one of the big things I've been noticing is then when they're trying to work on something, or they've had a couple of bad rounds, and then they go and have a couple of lessons back with the pro, etc. They will then sometimes just not consider the difference in load from doing a round and hitting the driving range for a few hundred balls, right? Because by nature, something's gone fairly wrong if you're doing more than 18 to 20 drives really on a round. Whereas they'll go and smash 200 balls. It's a significant difference there. And so when it comes to the actual demands of the sport, could you just talk me through what a typical golfer would be doing in terms of their play over a typical week or month?
So at the moment, a lot of my clients are between the age of 35 to 55, let's call it. So right. Middle age, typically men, some females in there as well. And I do see a couple of professionals, but we'll leave them out just for this point of the conversation. But let's say the typical 35 to 55-year-old, they will play once on the weekend generally and go to the driving range once or twice a week. And at the driving range, they might hit 50 to 100 golf balls, and then their game's about 4 hours long. But load management is such an important conversation to have with a lot of the clients that I see, and also that you may see as well, or your listeners may see. Because like you mentioned, if they go from one practice session a week to two, it's essentially doubling the load, and they don't realize that. So that's where these tendon injuries or stress injuries can come into it. So it's such an important conversation, and people just don't realize it.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad I'm not a million miles off then, that those sorts of factors do play a part in your thinking as well. Objectively, with regards to what it is you're testing and screening for, then, I have heard about that, the sort of, I think Titleist Pro is an institute. I have heard about that, but I don't know the constituent parts of it. You don't need to go through it in full, especially a 16 point check. But just broadly, is that looking for sort of movement quality, movement efficiency? You know, is it looking for segmental? Where's the mobility? Where's the stability? That sort of stuff. Can you give me sort of ballpark clues as to what that involves on the objective assessment?
Yeah, so I guess the test itself, it goes through most of the movements the golf swing requires. So, for example, it will look at shoulder rotation. Can you get the club to where it needs to be? And it basically goes from feet to neck and just looks at these movements. And then from there, you start to get a picture of what a client may be able to do or what they may not be able to do. So it's a great place to start. And I guess when I did the course 5 years ago, probably longer now, they used to market it as this is a way to say this is the way someone will swing. But we know that's not necessarily the case because everyone has their intricacies. But like I said, I think a general screening is great. Like I find it a nice system. And I know a number of other sports have that. But like I mentioned, it's just generally taking the body through all the required movements for golf.
Is there a risk that it becomes like a golf specific FMS where it's kind of having a quite narrow mechanism of describing good movement, right? So this is biomechanically pure. These are the plumb lines. This is what we need to aspire to. And it's actually quite a narrow template whereby people move more broadly than that. And especially on an injury level, talking not about performance and efficiency, because that's where you could recognize that someone's got a really poor golf swing, it's not going to be serving them very well. That's a different conversation. But on an injury level, it might well be that they have their quirks. Is there a risk, or maybe you'll tell me how this mechanism, this institute mitigate that risk? But definitely an FMS, and there's other acronyms that have been used for movement screens that then have always been about aspiration for perfect. And that's sort of where my spidey sensors go off a little bit when I hear about a screen.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, mate, too, because I've had those same concerns. And it's funny you mentioned FMS as well, because I believe Gray Cook helped design this with Titleist because he's got that background in screening, right? So I'm the same. Like I like to really go in depth with my clients, and hence why after the screening, I'll go a bit deeper into certain injuries if need be, or dig a little bit deeper in terms of tests I'll add in as well. Because look, if I was to do just the screening itself, great. I've done something. I've done more than probably a lot of other physios get the chance to do with golfers. But again, no system is perfect. And yeah, I agree. There needs to be a bit more done than just a system.
Yeah. So basically, you're using that, but you're integrating it into your reasoning rather than deferring to it by your reasoning, because it'd be easy for us to then, like you say, use it as a mechanism of being right. Here are the passes, here are the fails, here are the maybes. That's what you need to work on, almost as if it's sort of pseudo diagnostic. It sounds like instead you're integrating that into your considerations as well as other parts of your assessment.
100%. And also the other thing as well, like I'll be completely honest and say it's a great marketing tool as well, because Titleist, it's one of the biggest golf brands in the world.
Yeah.
And so they've got this platform. 30 of the world's best golfers have been through this test as well. So I guess for a general golfer, it's a great way of them saying, hey, who offers this testing and who can I go and see for it? So that's how it got me in as well. I thought, oh, this sounds great. Like if the best golfers in the world are doing this, I'll jump in. So for me, it's a great marketing strategy. But again, I feel like I'll do the test. I'll add more into that. And I'm always trying to give the customer as much value as possible too.
No, that makes sense. And it's funny because, yeah, as a non-golfer, I still recognize Titleist as a brand. You know, they're well known for that. And it just as a non-cricketer, I know Kookaburra and I know Gray Nichols. So you have these sort of names that can then break through culturally, and that's sometimes useful because, you know, in therapies we need those hooks, and if it's getting people good care, then that's great. And as long as we can then mitigate some of those risks on that screening level, then that's all for the better. What are the things that you feel that generalists like me might make mistakes of? Because I imagine you'll see some second opinion stuff. You'll probably see some people that are then coming to you having had some fairly ropey quality care. So I'm just interested in trying to work out how generalists like I can make sure we don't make some of these common mistakes.
Yeah, that's a lovely point to make, because I do see a lot of clients that have been to other physios and have tried just generalist physios, which is great as well. Like if you have access to a physio nearby you, by all means use them. Um, but I guess the main thing I see is people just overcomplicate it, to be honest. So like I mentioned to start with, like I'm very eager to see how someone rotates through the spine, the hips, the shoulders. So typically if they aren't doing that very well, they're going to make compensations elsewhere. So what I see a lot of is physios give these really fancy drills, and
Right.
they're not they're not getting to the nuts and bolts. They're getting to these rotational centers. So the first thing I look at is that, and then build upon that as I will. So again, you can give clients fancy drills, but if you're not getting to the core root of their problem, I feel like it may be a uphill battle for you.
Okay. What about then the technical aspects of your assessment? Do you use motion capture? Do you use other integrated technologies? Do you have a net set up in clinic where you? Well, I mean, you might be. This is where you tell me you're based at a club or based at a range. I don't know, but I'm just meaning like I'm trying to think about practically how that's done and how you will do swing analysis.
Yeah, so at the moment, I do it through slow motion capture. So I'll get a client to record me. I'll pull that into an app. I'll start drawing lines through that, looking at particular degrees of motion. And from there, we give them some feedback. And I'm not quite in the position to invest in a lot of other technology at the moment, but I'm certainly considering it in the future, where you can put basically markers on someone's body and capture this all in 3D. And again, going back to the Titleist Institute, they do this with a lot of the world's best golfers, and they can extrapolate that information to potentially decrease injuries. So, yeah, what I do now, I've currently got a net set up at a home gym. I'll get people to hit
Yeah.
into the net, record it, and it gives me some insight. And I feel, again, it's a value add. In the past, I used to be locked into a clinic room. I could barely swing a golf club in there. So now clients really enjoy me looking at their swing in person. Otherwise, again, if it's overseas or somewhere else in the country, they'll just send it via text or via message.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've been thinking of doing that as well. Like you're getting them to you get people to bring video, etc., and it's like angles not quite right and stuff, and so being able to do that in real time, and then also try and change something, try and tweak something, treat something, and retest. So I think setting up a net. It's interested that you've done that. I'll definitely be bearing that in mind. Because you've mentioned about having a strength and conditioning sort of bias to your style of practice. Do you then see people ongoing that are they've recovered from their injury, but they're aspiring to better performance? So you've got that where physio meets S&C meets personal trainer type role. Do you work with people on that ongoing basis?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the typical pathway for a lot of clients. They'll see me typically for an injury. I help them manage that injury. And in that time as well, we're educating a lot about strength and conditioning. And there's a lot of research suggesting that strength and conditioning can decrease chronic injuries or these overload injuries. So in that time, I'll educate clients on that. And like I mentioned before, some clients start on board just as a pure performance basis. So whether that's increasing their swing speed, increasing their power, playing better golf. So yeah, there's a variety of clients, whether it's pain management, whether it's aspiring to get quicker, and whatever their goals might be, which makes the job really fun and always learning more, mate.
Yeah, quite. No, I can imagine how that'd end up being nice and varied. If I tease out some of the things that you've answered as being fairly common presentations, then so let's say someone is not getting good thoracic rotation, and they're developing, let's say a 50 odd year old gent that's got that lack of rotation, they're developing, say, back and hip pain associated to it. What are the sort of classic conditioning related drills? Are you doing resisted rotation type stuff? Are they into sustained yoga poses? Like, what? Just I know we're being general now, but I'm just intrigued as to what sort of treatment direction you would have for a sort of loose case like that.
Yeah, certainly. So typically, I'll start with pretty basic stretches as well, and I'll just caveat this with My specialty, I do like to assess really hard and treat easy. That's like one thing I always say to a lot of my clients. So
Right. Okay.
with my drills, there's nothing too fancy, but yeah, going back to the question, I'll do a lot of just basic static stretches to start with to get rotation. If I find they can't sustain rotation, if we keep coming back to the same point, then I'll add in strength related drills. So, like you said, resisting against bands. Also, with rotation as well, I find that shoulder weakness can be an issue as well. So, yeah, so I see the pattern quite a lot of internal rotation being quite strong, external being quite weak. So I feel that feeds into the rotation as well. So to help with rotation, we do a lot of shoulder work for some clients and also general strengthening as well. So yeah, sorry to jump across a couple of different paths there, but I guess to answer, I start with basic thoracic rotational drills. If they can't sustain it, some strength work into that rotation. And then thirdly, looking up and down the chain where else they might be having a problem.
Yeah, and I think like any good therapist, you're going to be tailoring and individualizing. So I'm generalizing for the sake of a podcast on such a broad case study there. But I think what I know that I've had an interesting journey with, and still I'm on it really with regards to how much of a problem it is that golf is so asymmetric, right? So I'll go through phases where I'm giving out a lot of left-handed swings to right-handed golfers, or I'm particularly bothered about asymmetries in rotation and stuff. Like, have we any either evidence or from your experience that can help me to sort of grapple with that? You know, whether to fuss over those sorts of things or not.
Yeah, I think in the perfect world, getting golfers to do left-handed swings more often, or if they're a left-handed, right-handed swings more often, would be great. And I just find the compliance is quite low with doing that. So
Right.
yeah, I've tried multiple different strategies, but I do let clients know that I am looking for symmetry, left versus right, in most movements, or at least 90%. So, for example, if they've got 10 kilos of strength on one side, I'm pretty keen to see 9 on the other. So,
Sure.
although it's a one-sided sport, you still need to walk like a human and do everything else with both hands and both legs. So, I'm pretty keen to see that even across the board.
No, fair play. And I imagine that then, so for example, with regards to the swing, the rotation, like your external rotation of your front arm, so to speak, is going to be more important than the back arm. So are you bothered about those sorts of things and accounting for that, or do you want that symmetry aspirational?
Yeah, I want to even both sides. I will argue with you that I like to see the back arm external rotation better if
Right.
it's
No,
choosing between the two.
do disagree with me. I'm thinking on the fly now, and I'm just thinking mechanically. Wouldn't that almost like I'm being crude with it and thinking like much like a backhand in tennis is going to involve more external rotation, but perhaps I'm mistaken. So what is it then biomechanically the external rotation of the back arm, what, because of the back swing, or what? Would you talk me through that?
Yeah, it's the backswing setup. So
Right.
having close to 90 degrees allows the right arm to get into a good position, and that's more of a mobility thing. But look, I'm definitely happy to
Oh,
agree
for
with you in the
range rather
downs.
than strength, then you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I guess I was probably over biased in power, but no, I can make sense of that for position. Okay, good. I'm not completely miles off, then that's nice. But yeah, but these are the things that the intricacies and quirks of. That's definitely an area where that subspecialism is really valuable. Really understanding the demands of the sport and also how many swings you'll have seen even this week in slow motion. The intricate details of it compared to the general. So no, that's great. What top tips would you give generalists then? Not overcomplicate it. You've already given me that, which is great. But what other sort of classic mistakes would you try to mitigate?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the ones I've seen in the past. So I think having some consistency with the golfers in terms of like a stretching program is quite important. So I'll try and get them to educate their clients as best as possible to set up something throughout the day. So if they're a desk-based worker, for example, they can add some thoracic rotation and sitting. That's easy to do. They can cross their leg to get some hip external rotation. They can stretch their arm on a wall to get some some shoulder rotation as well. So I think getting the clients to do something consistently is really important. And also, I'd really try and encourage physios to get their golfers to warm up before play. And going back to golf being played in multiple different generations, we still see it as one of those sports that doesn't require a lot of good physical attributes. But there's so much research being done that a warm up in golf specifically can help performance, but also injury management. So that would be my top tips.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The amount of times that people think, oh, I'll loosen up by the fourth hole, and then they'll be pissed off at their performance prior to that. And it's like, well, you can't have it both. You can't have it both ways, especially because those first few holes are often the mood setters. And so why not warm up? So yeah, I'm often trying to bang that drum. So that's reassuring. Tell folk a little bit about where they can find more about you and also make referrals.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. So I've got an Instagram page, which is golf_physio_Oz, AUS, or they can find me at golfphysiotherapyaustralia.com. But happy to help with other physios. And a lot of physios message me asking for advice. So I'm always happy to help out. And if you have any tricky clients, definitely happy to help out also.
Superb. No, that's great. And it's great to have you. Thanks for joining me today and also, being part of a sort of community of practice that is helping each other to try and make those refinements, because we can't all subspecialize in everything, and nor should we. But if we can, as a community, make sure that then we raise the standards, it means that then when we can and we know where to refer those more tricky, more complex, more stubborn conditions, where it needs that extra bit of expertise on the eye, especially as we're describing those sort of the complex biomechanics of golf swing, of which would be well over my head. So thanks a lot. I've learned a lot today. Really appreciate it, and hopefully speak to you soon.
No, Jack, really appreciate your time, mate. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Billy. All the best.
Here at Physio Matters, we think physio matters. Access the library today and get access to the biggest lot of MSK content on the planet. Watch at home, work, or up a mountain to ensure your knowledge is at its peak. Physio-matters.com. More content than you can balance a treatment couch on.